Gun Midoriya. Written by Ricketus_Flame, Anna_Hopkins. Dubbed by Melberry Stars. Summary. It started out as a Saturday like any other. Then, "Aw, hey, a present from Dad!" Midoriya beamed down at the black wrap box on the table. "Sweet." "Holy shit, Deku, is that a gun?" "Deku, no!" "Deku, yes!" Before this fanfiction starts, I just want to say thank you so much for 1K subscribers. I'm shocked that I even got this far, and I'm so happy that you guys like the content that I make, and I hope I can still make content that you guys like. But I love you guys so much. Alright, let's get in. Chapter 1. It started out like a Sunday like any other. Everyone's mail had been brought in baskets sorted out by recipient, and students were opening letters and boxes all over the dorms. Hitoshi, for example, was tucked into the corner of the kitchen, flipping through several flyers urging him to donate to charities. He wouldn't have minded if they'd thrown it out. He was as broke as it got. Araka was sitting at the kitchen table, reading letters from her elderly neighbors, and so was Midoriya. Well, not the neighbor part. He actually had a lot of fan mail. Hitoshi was not jealous. He wasn't. Anyway, it really had started out like a Saturday like any other. Then, "Oh hey, a present from Dad!" Midoriya grinned down at the box he pulled out from the bottom of the bin, opening the cardboard to get to the black wrap package inside. He sat it on the table. "Sweet!" "What is it?" asked Hitoshi. "Hero merch?" What else did Midoriya even like? Notebooks? Red sneakers? It was a fair guess. "From Dad?" Midoriya rolled his eyes, still smiling, as he tore away the paper to reveal a lockbox. Huh. Now Hitoshi was kinda curious. He watched Midoriya key in a code to a number pad on the front and then put his thumb on a biometric scanner until the lock clicked open. "I can get merch on my own," Midoriya said. Todoroki, who'd been lugging his basket of mail upstairs, was now standing at the edge of the table with a notepad, eyes at Midoriya with the lockbox intently. "This is important Midoriya lore," he declared, pen at the ready, when Araka raised her eyebrows at him. "I can't miss a single detail." "Right, okay then," she muttered, pointedly ignoring Todoroki after that to focus on Midoriya, whose grin, it should be noted, was showing a lot more teeth than it normally did. In fact, Hitoshi would go as far to say it was, creepy. "So what'd you get, Deku?" "I am too curious," exclaimed Ida, who'd stuck his head out in the doorway. Midoriya's gaze flickered over to the rest of them and the back of the box, and then he began to chuckle. Like the smile, this wasn't his usual shy laugh. It was kind of creepy. He flipped the lid on the lockbox open. There was a layer of gray foam on top, and under that, at last, was... "Holy shit, Deku, is that a gun?" Araka scrambled back from the table, wide-eyed. Ida leapt into the room. "Midoriya, no!" "Midoriya, yes!" Izuku cackled, raising the weapon from its case, with both hands turning it all around to look it over. "Oh, it's beautiful, even if you filed out the serial numbers just for me!" That gleam in Midoriya's eyes, it sent shivers down Hitoshi's spine. "Deku, you can't have that!" Araka cried. "That's even more illegal!" Midoriya returned the gun to its lockbox in a flash and closed it. "Have what?" He beamed, and it really was less sunshine and more nuclear reactor core. "A realistic airsoft toy? Right, Araka, did you think this was real?" He held up the lockbox. "Are you feeling alright? Should I get Recovery Girl?" Hitoshi narrowed his eyes. Was Midoriya gaslighting them? "What, Midoriya, that is clearly a..." Midoriya raised a dissertive eyebrow. Hitoshi didn't know he could make that expression. It was so uncharacteristic of him. A collectible toy, Ochako, and an expensive one. How could you think it was anything else? He looked taken aback, as he was offended Araka had doubted him. What a savage. Todoroki, Hitoshi noted, didn't say a word about Midoriya's strange behavior either. only watched his friend, calculating as Midoriya shook his head and hefted up the rest of the mail to bring upstairs. When he'd left, Hitoshi got down from his chair in the corner and approached the table. So did Ida.
Right, Hitoshi addressed the other three. That was obviously not fake.
Todoroki nodded, solemn. Ida was pale. Araka, wasn't it though? She asked. Deku, he wouldn't lie to us. Holy shit. Midoriya has succeeded in twisting the narrative.
Think of it this way,
Hitoshi suggested, because arguing over the details was going to take too long.
Even if it's an airsoft, Midoriya shouldn't be keeping it in the dorms where someone else could get a hold of it. Let's tell Aizawa.
Astoundingly, Todoroki and even Ida looked hesitant. Hitoshi could not believe this.
Is he blackmailing you two?
He hissed. Todoroki blinked. No, he said, and didn't elaborate.
I owe Midoriya-kun his help in the past,
Todoroki admitted, sheepish.
He stopped me from making a very grave mistake. So now you feel like you can't report him to the authorities? Hitoshi observed. Well,
Ida averted his eyes.
Yes. Even for something as minor as having contraband in the dorms.
Ida stayed silent.
He wouldn't even get in trouble.
Hitoshi was beginning to get concerned.
It's not about punishment, it's about responsible use of dorm resources.
There. That had to get Ida's straight-laced brain in gear, right?
I suppose it's only fair to hold Midoriya to the same standards as everyone else.
Ida managed, eventually, but it looked like the condition had been dragged out of him unwillingly. Wild. Hitoshi pulled out his phone and dialed Aizawa's number. Shota burst into the staff room with furious, feral eyes, panting like he'd been running from the other end of the campus. He had.
Who the fuck, he snarled, gave Midoriya a gun?
Everyone looked at All Might, who had developed into a coughing fit.
Young Midoriya has what?
Snipe shook his head, speechless, before Shota even had to ask, which left. He turned his gaze upon the security camera in the corner of the room.
Nezu?
He asked, an instigated threat in his voice.
Did you give Problem Child firearms?
Definitely not, chirped the principal from the air vent, opening the grate and hopping down onto the sofa. By Midoriya-kun's own admission, the package was a gift from his father.
Young Midoriya doesn't have a father,
All Might blurted out. Then we will need to speak with him directly, Nezu beamed.
And
Shota wished he didn't have to say any of this, but
we'll need to search his room.
Chapter 2. The principal summoned Midoriya to his office for a friendly chat after the end of the school day on Monday, the most opportune time for a dorm search without alerting the other students. Shota braced himself for the alarm to cross Problem Child's face when he relayed the message at homeroom, but no. Midoriya just smiled and nodded like it happened often enough already. Shota decided not to think about how often and under what pretext Nezu was meeting regularly with Midoriya. Better to focus on something that did not fill him with dread for the future. Like the weight of a key in his pocket as he, Hisashi, and Snipe, local subject matter expert, making their way up to Problem Child's dorm. He unlocked the door and stepped inside.
What the hell?
He hissed, recoiling at the dozens of figurines all turned towards the door, staring at him. They were mostly All Might, too. It was fucking unsettling.
Ain't that a deterrent?
Snipe muttered with a wince. The three of them began to search their room. There was nothing in the ceiling, Shota checked that first, after the debacle with Mineta, or for the fact under the mattress, under the bed, tucked behind books on the bookshelf, or stowed in a drawer in his desk. Midoriya, like Bakugo and Todoroki, kept his room very neat. Even his closet was clean and organized.
Kinda cramped in here,
Snipe grumbled, leaning back against Midoriya's desk and knocking his head against the wall. Wait.
Snipe, knock on the wall again.
The man did. Hisashi gasped.
That's not what the other walls sound like.
Thinking quickly, Shota pulled up a floor plan for the dorms. The built-in closet on the desk side of Midoriya's room was not on the floor plan. He threw open the closet doors and shoved the clothes aside. Yes, that was a sturdy locked door in the inner wall of the closet space, with a keyhole lock and a thumbprint scanner.
"Snipe," Shota called quietly. "What does this look to you?"
Because to him, it looked like Midoriya had more than one gun in his room. In fact, it looked like he had a collection. So they haven't really managed to improve on the rebar and constant construction, but Hastame thinks... Izuku paused mid-sentence as a series of high-frequency beeps played from his phone. "Excuse me, Sensei. I'm getting a security alert." He blinked and opened an app hidden several layers into his home screen. "Security, you say?" Nezu perked up, intrigued.
"Yeah, it's for my dorms,"
Izuku muttered, entering his Gen-or-so password twice.
"I have a lot of collectibles, so I took out my renter's insurance."
He stopped, staring at the feed of the security cameras.
"Oh, they're doing a dorm room check? At least my room is clean."
As he watched, however, the 3 pro-heroes appeared to figure out the modification he'd made to his room. This might be a problem, Izuku thought distantly, feeling the faint urge to panic. He was too well-trained to panic, though. "Principal Nezu," Izuku spoke with a controlled calm. "Will Aizawa-sensei, Present Mike, and Snipe be needing access to my storage room?" The principal had abandoned any pretense of indifference and was leaning forward in his chair. "It would be easier if they did," he suggested. "Those locks seem quite sophisticated."
"I would prefer a yes or no answer, sir,"
Izuku clarified. He was recording their conversation now, after all. The principal's eyes sharpened. "Is that so? Then, citing the school's handbook on reasonable investigation, I must say yes." Today was going to be more interesting than he'd planned for it to be. Shota nearly jumped out of his skin when the lock on the door lit up on the intercom.
"Aizawa-sensei,"
greeted Midoriya, voice disorientated into something indistinguishable by the moderator.
"Nezu-sensei asked me to unlock the door for you guys. I don't use remote access for security reasons, so please enter the following sequence into the number pad twice, and then double-tap 0 to bypass the biometrics."
"Dang, kid, this here's some high-end security,"
Snipe contributed over his shoulder.
"It's only reasonable considering the value of the contents,"
Midoriya replied.
"You can take photos, but please don't touch anything."
"Why is that, listener?" Hisashi asked, while Aizawa finished entering in the codes.
"They're expensive,"
was Midoriya's reply before the intercom went out. The door opened with a hiss of the hiermetric seal, and rows of lights turned on to show off.
"What in the good goddamn—"
Hitoshi heard from Midoriya's room on his way back to his dorm. Was that Snipe? So they're finally going through his room then, he thought. Cool. Friend or not, Midoriya couldn't be allowed to hide an actual gun in the dorm room. That was crossing a line. Hitoshi only hoped it wouldn't strain their friendship too much when Midoriya found out who reported him.
"Where did he get all of these?"
A different voice was wondering, astonished, and that sounded like Aizawa, so Hitoshi naturally stuck a little closer to the closed door to eavesdrop.
"And when?"
Wait, there were multiple? His phone screen lit up with an incoming text. Hitoshi swiped to read it, and his stomach dropped. Izuku. +81 xxx.xxxx. Izuku. 1548. Keep walking, Hitoshi. That was scary. He was going to his room now. So, Midoriya, do you have experience in handling firearms? Asked Nezu conversationally while he poured his tea. Nezu waited for him to say more. Izuku didn't elaborate. He got comfortable in his chair. If he tried to leave, he'd be detained officially. And then he'd miss out on his tea. So he stayed and took a sip.
"This is excellent tea, sir. Thank you."
The principal hummed and sipped from his own cup. Those were the last words they exchanged until the teachers arrived. Chapter 3. Shota had so many questions. He knew he wasn't going to get any answers yet, but he wanted it on record that he had questions, such as, What the fuck, problem child? And how did nobody notice? And perhaps most potentially, your firearm training wasn't on your UA application. Why? It would have changed Shota's entire point of view on the kid if he had known he had actual combat training with some degree prior to attending. All Might had already confessed to helping him with strength training when Shota assimilated him into the group handled for Nezu's office. The man had no idea Midoriya actually knew to fight. Granted, All Might was incredibly oblivious to a lot of things, so Shota wasn't entirely surprised. To be honest, if he'd known Midoriya knew how to handle weapons, he would probably not have pushed back as hard as letting him into the Shihazaki raid. No, he'd still had opposed it on principle. Problem Child was 16, and he'd only just gotten his provisional license. He shouldn't have had to been involved in the first place. Midoriya smiled shyly, averting his eyes to the principal's desk. He turned his teacup over in his hand. It wouldn't have been really relevant at the time, since the entrance exam only covers quirks. Fair. They barely even let people use medically necessary support items, so unless his quirk created guns, it wouldn't have affected his score. I was going to disclose it when I got to that part of the curriculum, which wouldn't have been until at least his second year, naturally. Shota opened his mouth to say much, but Nezu interrupted. Midoriya, as we will need to ask you a few questions with a parent or guardian present, I have taken the liability of calling your mother. Midoriya, who'd been relatively calm throughout his investigation, went pale. He said, I guess if you have to. Somehow, in planning for all the eventualities of being caught with his presence from Dad, Izuku had not accounted for one rather important thing. His father? Izuku never told me he was in contact with his father. Mom's expression went from shocked to very stern, and all Nezu had asked her so far was if she knew Midoriya Hisashi was involved in his son's life. She didn't even know what he was in trouble for yet. Izuku swallowed and met his mother's gaze evenly when she turned to look at him. What was the best thing he could say to get out of this? What would Dad suggest? I thought you knew. Izuku lied blatantly to Inko's face. You know everything. He didn't expect Mom's reaction either. Barely kept a neutral expression as she gasped and drew back, eyes welling with tears. Did he teach you that? She demanded. Izuku, how dare you try to manipulate your own mother? Huh. Somehow he'd never expected revulsion. It kind of stung, actually. That angry glint in her eyes. He trusted that she would never look at him like that. And yet, another part of him had always expected it to happen. Someday, albeit for different reasons, and was quietly vindicated. He'd been trusting, sure, but not naive. None of that now, Midoriya-kun. Detective Takashi is here to observe the rest of the questioning. Nezu crossed his paws in front of him in his desk. Everything will be resolved much more easily if you answer truthfully. Well, obviously, Izuku thought, compartmentalizing away the other train of thought for later. What did they think he would have gained from lying? Never mind that, he'd been perfectly honest. He had wondered if Inko knew about his time with Dad or not. He would have had to ask her directly when the detective was here to check his answer. For now, Izuku did the independent thing, and didn't look at her at all. Of course, Nezu wouldn't be Nezu if he didn't leave an important detail to catch people off guard. Izuku should have predicted it, though when he heard Detective Takashi was arriving, All Might was never far behind. Namasa had gotten a call about 20 minutes ago from the principal of UA. Nezu had been ominously chipper when asking for his presence at the school investigation, and frankly, Namasa had considered declining on grounds of that alone, until Nezu explained they were questioning Midoriya. All Might asked for some reassurance, elaborated the principal, and well, that was that. He'd been escorted to the administration wing by a hurried-looking present Mike, and asked to wait outside Nezu's office until he was called in, and was shortly joined there by Yagi, who explained something out of the situation in an undertone. Midoriya had been caught with contraband in the dorms. Okay, so why do I have to be here? Namasa couldn't help but wonder, if it's a school matter, not a criminal one.
Not the kind of stuff Mineta-kun had in his room,
Yagi added, sensing his confusion. Namasa needed no clarification on that incident. He'd heard about it from Yagi before. Ugh.
Actual illegal weapons that shouldn't be in Japan, much less UA.
Truth. Namasa eyed him.
Not preparations for dealing with that man?
Yagi shrugged.
I wouldn't know.
Truth.
If it was for a good reason like that, although, don't you think he would have told me?
Probably not. To a straight-laced limelight hero like you, he thought to himself. But before he could answer out loud, the door was opening, Nezu beckoning them from within. Namasa had met Midoriya Izuku before, and understood the boy as an earnest limelight hero from the new generation. Motivated, full of conviction, and rather anxious off the field. So having multiple teachers, the principal and the boy's mother all present in the room, it was a bit excessive at first glance. Then he looked closer and found the expectation subverted. The most nervous person in the room was not Midoriya Izuku, but his mother. And the one she was glaring at with such a defiant expression was not the principal, as would have made sense for any protective parent, but her own son. A son who was wearing a cultivated blank calm Namasa had associated with individuals of certain background in organized crime. "Hello, detective," he said, a polite smile plastered on his face that only made his comparison stronger. "Yagi-sensei."
Izuku, my boy.
Yagi started forward, but faltered at Nezu's sharp intake of the head before he could give his successor a hug.
What's going on? Are you alright?
Izuku's smile dropped into a flat neutrality. His gaze flickered ever so briefly at Namasa, before he answered, "I could be better." "Truth." "Midoriya-kun is here," Nezu informed them, "to be questioned on his possession of weapons, cliché including, among other things, more than 20 different black market firearms and an undisclosed safe in his room."
Wait, what?
"Detective Takashi, will you do the honors?"
Chapter 4.
Izuku interlaced his fingers on the desk in front of him, listening to Takashi go through the procedures of beginning a formal interrogation. He allowed his face to settle into a comfortable blankness while Detective turned on a recorder and spoke to start the record.
Detective Takashi Namasa of Mustafu PD, present as consultant of Team to UA staff and as lead of the interrogation.
Inko, when prompted, confirmed her presence and gave her consent for Izuku to be questioned. She was sitting next to All Might, he noticed, going by the sound of their voices. He didn't turn to look, because the sting had not faded. His disappointment remained, though he could acknowledge that redirecting the blame might have not been the best opening move. Well, hindsight was flawless, foresight was blind, and Dad had advised him on the laws and loopholes he was dealing with when he confessed his plans to keep the collection on campus. He would figure something out.
Please state your name and age and the status for the record, Takashi prompted.
Midoriya Izuku, age 16, UA student and provisionally licensed hero Deku.
True.
Under normal circumstances, Namasa would have pressed a suspect for their quirk status, but in this case he knew better, and so did Nezu. One for All remained a state secret, and he didn't know who in the room was briefed and who wasn't.
Any aliases?
He asked instead, more to fill the silence than anything while he mentally reviewed what questions he'd need to be asking. Midoriya didn't hesitate. None that I'd like to disclose at the time.
True.
What? Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Yagi twitch, and Midoriya's mother lean into his side, staring holes into the back of Midoriya's head. If the boy could feel how intensely he was being watched, he didn't show it. Noted. Namasa said at length, and then, let's discuss the items in your dorms. I am told that Aizawa-sensei found an inventory list on the wall. The printed photo of the list was passed into Namasa's hands. He scanned it, eyebrows climbing with every line.
Where did you even get half of these things?
He muttered under his breath, before he composed himself.
Where did you acquire these weapons stored in your dorm?
About a third were confiscated from criminals I've caught, like the Shihazaki.
True.
Q.E bullets secured in a biometric safe read one line under ammo knives 2, stain 2, weighted heavily on Namasa's mind under non-firearm weapons, where Aizawa's note was in the margin, had described them in a plexiglass display case like a trophy. Hadn't those been processed as evidence from Hosu? Was anything purchased? Namasa asked to interrupt the more concerning train of thought. Midoriya took a moment to think about it. All maintenance supplies, tools, and healing equipment like gloves and goggles, he listed off. True. And then, nothing illegal to buy in Japan besides... False, Namasa blurted out, surprised. Please elaborate. Oh, well, they're legal for a quirkless person to own, and I was quirkless when I bought them. True. I have written receipts from those items stored in a lockbox inside the safe. True. Aizawa's brow furrowed, confused at the still quirkless tidbit. So he hadn't read into the one-for-all situation. Namasa filed that detail away for now. Right then. Legally, you can be cited and fined for not registering or relinquishing some of those items into police custody, but that is a matter for your guardians to handle. A pause, and a glance at Midoriya's mother, who looked a mix of furious and out of her depth. What of the remaining items, the ones not confiscated or purchased as you have already described? Those are gifts from my dad. True. Midoriya allowed himself a small, unconscious smile. Midoriya Hisashi, age unknown, quirk, fire breath. True. And I don't know his citizenship status for certain, but he lives and works in America. True. He and my mom are still married, but she hasn't seen him in years. True. Namasa took note of the omission. Midoriya's mother may not have seen her husband in years, but that said nothing of Midoriya himself, and he wasn't about to let that detail go. When was the last time you were in contact with Midoriya Hisashi? A few days ago, by phone. True. You have his phone number? Inko hissed, paling several shades. Izuku! Midoriya's face went blank again, collapsed hands twitching on the desk. At the interruption, he stared pointedly at Namasa, waiting for the next question, with a nary any indication of his body language that he heard his mother at all. If he was reading the boy correctly, and Namasa was quite good at reading people, the slight twist in his expression was annoyance, not fear. He was not going to comment on that. On the subject of your father, and he's substantially greater part of this matter than anyone else, to put it lightly. How long have you been in regular contact with Midoriya Hisashi? And why is exactly he giving you deadly weapons of all things as gifts? Well, Midoriya began, it's kind of a long story. You see, 10 years ago, Midoriya Hisashi left Japan and his family behind. Besides regular contributions of money into the household accounts, he ceased all contact with Inko and their son for the next 5 years until when Izuku was 11, he got a smartphone in the mail with one number already saved in the contacts. Dad. Izuku had immediately turned off the phone and hid it in his room for the next 2 months. Is that the same phone you have now? Namasa prompted. Oh no, this one is much better encrypted, Midoriya told him. True. Which only raised more questions. How's he supposed to feel about his absentee father trying to walk right back into his life? Izuku mulled it over, quietly stewing until circumstances aligned and his curiosity finally got the better of him, just before his 12th birthday. I'd been hit pretty hard by a bully earlier that day, Midoriya confessed, averting his eyes briefly to the desk. Who hated me for being quirkless, of course. By then, I knew it had to be my dad's fault, genetically speaking. I wanted to call him and yell at him about it. Did you? Yagi asked from behind him. Midoriya smiled a little to himself. A little, but in the end, we reconciled. Izuku's father confessed that he had not left willingly, an important detail his mother had left out. An extended hospitalization overseas had eventually led Inko to file for divorce, which Hisashi had agreed not to contest, except when she had demanded the cessation of all contact between Hisashi and Izuku. Well, after the divorce papers had been signed and notarized, as if she had any such right. So obviously he wasn't going to listen to that demand very long, Midoriya scoffed. Family is very important to my dad. Everything, if you ask him. Being away from us, especially me, for so long, it wasn't something he'd ever wanted, or something he could really handle. True. Namasa glanced at Midoriya Inko over her son's shoulder. She was working her jaw and her grip on Tortionary's hand might as well already be bruised. When she caught his eye, though, and he raised a prompting eyebrow, she stiffly shook her head. Not now, she mouthed. Back to questioning Midoriya then. Hearing this one-sided account of things after years of radio silence didn't raise any alarm bells? The boy's father might have been wronged by his ex-wife, or he might have been lying, hoping to drive a wedge between the mother and son. Midoriya laughed. Of course he did. The way he went on about it sounded like a big boss in a mob film. I was 12, not an idiot. He leaned in, gaze sharpening, but that didn't mean he wasn't sincere. Having kept to his ex-wife's wishes, he stayed away for so many years. Hisashi was now desperate to reconnect with his son, and Izuku found he was not as mad at the man as he'd be expecting to be. By the end of the conversation, not once he heard his father's explanation and his offer. He wanted me to come to America and visit him, which I obviously wasn't just up and going along out of nowhere. Midoriya rolled his eyes, the corner of his mouth curving up in a half-fond smile. No matter how unhappy I was. I gave him until the next school break to convince me that it was a good idea, he continued. And well, Midoriya's smile turned sheepish, and he'd steadily become more animated the longer his story went on. Namasa noticed, coaxed out from behind the stone facade by a topic he clearly liked. Well? Someone, Midoriya's mother, prompted, and with that one sharp word, the walls went back up. Namasa was beginning to lose his patience with Midoriya Inko. The next day, Midoriya recited, cold again, there was a lockbox on my desk with 1 million yen and a set of documents naming me Akatani Mukamo, 16, with a nondescript analysis quirk. True. Chapter 5. What the hell, problem child? Shota's jaw ached with how hard he was clenching his teeth to keep from yelling this thought out loud. If he started screaming now, he didn't know if he would stop. At least he wasn't the only one in the room who wasn't liking the picture this was painting. Least of all Yagi and Midoriya's mother, the latter of whom in particular should have known this was going on. Shota did not want to make assumptions, but it was beginning to sound like this Midoriya Hisashi guy was very much in the middle of some serious organized crime. One might wonder then, why not report him? But Shota was unfortunately quite familiar with the usual outcome of such actions. She had probably intended to protect Problem Child from the consequences of being outed as a villain's son. And you were convinced by this? The detective managed to ask when he at last regained his composure. Midoriya huffed a laugh. Oh, hell no. I called him back to remind him that I was actually quirkless. Somehow that was the kid me's top priority. A pause, a self-deprecating smile. Obviously, he knew that and had arranged things on purpose, just like how he knew Aldera was trying to crush my dreams based on my lack of a quirk. Okay, wait. Midoriya. Shota cut in, because that and something he had said earlier were confusing him the more he thought about it. You were 12, you said, when this conversation happened? A nod. How long, until when were you considered quirkless? The day of the entrance exam, Midoriya replied, and went to continue his story, as if that weren't a detail that shifted Shota's entire worldview sideways. He glanced at Takashi. The detective blinked twice at him. Truth. Holy shit. That is the only person I've ever met who told me I didn't need a quirk to be a hero, said young Midoriya, and Toshinori felt his heart break just a little. because that was present tense. His own words to the boy only hours before choosing him as his successor came back to him, daggers piercing through his spirit in a whole new way. Even I didn't completely believe it. Before I went to America and saw for myself, "You left the country without telling me?" Inko could be very loud when she wanted to be, Toshinori discovered, and hoped that wasn't a permanent hearing damage. "Hizuku, when—" Her son didn't even glance her way. Toshinori wondered if that was a defense mechanism or just plain spite. His successor had proven surprisingly capable of spite in the past hour or so, for someone with such a forgiving heart, and it concerned him a little to see Izuku that way. At Namasa's prompting, young Midoriya picked up where he left off. "I visited my father about 10 times before UA, under the pretense of overnight field trips for school, in order to train with experts in different weapons. He paid for someone with a time dilation quirk to extend the days into months, so I had time to really learn." A pause, thoughtful. Between the documented aging under the time quirk and the actual years that passed, Akatani Mukumo had turned 18 and received a gun license not long before I met All Might. I have copies of the documents in the safe. It was strange to think the scrawny middle schooler Toshinori had saved from the slime villain that day had already been capable of using lethal weapons. He honestly couldn't reconcile the two ideas into one image. Even now, he knew Izuku owned multiples of said weapons. The look on Amasa's face said he wasn't thinking the same thing. "And what does Midoriya Hisashi ask for in return for all this?" he wondered. "Nothing," Midoriya told him with an easy smile. "All he wants is for me to be happy, healthy, and whole. His words, not mine. When I started training for the UA entrance exam, he sent me a specialized medicine to enhance my gains and reinforce my bones and joints. I would have probably overtrained my body and gotten injured otherwise." Was that what had been in those protein shakes Toshinori remembered him drinking sometimes at the beach? He'd always been impressed by his successor's mental and physical fortitude, even when in the face of such hard work. Izuku was always worn out by the end of the day, like anyone would be. In hindsight, medicine was the best explanation of how he managed to wear himself out and then come back the next day like it had never happened. For all that, it had technically been a violation of super soldier prevention laws. Toshinori was glad for Mr. Midoriya's contribution to Izuku's training. "Do you still take the medicine now?" Namasa wondered. He shared a glance with Nezu and added, "Off the record." "No," Izuku sighed. "It interacts with the pain medication for my hands. He said he had people working on reformulating it, but I'd be better to reconstruct the hands entirely. That was a few months ago, though, so I don't know how the project is going." "Well, that was something." "I believe we've gotten a bit off topic," Namasa admitted after a beat, leaving out that he had been too intrigued by the story until now to redirect it, and interrupting the completive silence that had descended on the room after that bit of testimony. "I have a few more questions, and then we can wrap up my part into the discussion." "All right." "You said you last spoke to Midoriya Hisashi by phone several days ago." "Yes." "True." "Are you able to contact him by phone right now?" Midoriya paused, considering. The moment stretched out, such as Midoriya's mother seemed to speak up again, until he blinked and answered at last. "I can call Dad if you want to talk to him, but only through my phone." "True." "Please do," Nezu beamed from the corner of the room. "I believe we could use some of his perspective." "False," said Namasa's quirk, but far to be it for him to demand the principal's actual motivations. Midoriya nodded and took out his phone.
Chapter 6. That was a suspiciously long phone number, was Shota's first thought watching Problem Child dial. Was it a password to an encrypted cell service? It couldn't be an extension, after all. The call hadn't even connected yet, and most high-security phone apps had a different interface. Midoriya was, for all appearances, just the regular program. It was strange, but not nearly as strange as the voice that answered within 2 rings.
Izu.
Midoriya Hisashi greeted his son brightly, the identifying markers of his voice obscured by the deliberate distortion filter.
Did you like your present?
"Yeah, it's great," Midoriya smiled. a warmth in his tone that Shota tried and failed to remember hearing him use with his mother in the past. Clearly, the favorite has always been problem parent. Go figure.
I do believe it's earlier than your usual call, though.
Hisashi went on, tone light but curious.
What's wrong? You know you can tell me anything.
Emphasis Shota heard on anything. The color in Midoriya's cheeks would normally be accompanied by him ducking his head in embarrassment, but this time, at least, he remained upright, straight-backed, unashamed of the emotion. Well, I'm being questioned about the guns right now, he admitted, with a certainty of dry humor that Shota could appreciate.
Oh, I see.
Shota paused for the dramatic effect.
Plural.
I may have carelessly waved around the newest one in front of some friends and gotten my room searched.
They told on you? Some friends.
Problem child sighed, the tilt of his head a reluctant acknowledgement of his father's veiled criticism. Hitoshi is Aizawa-sensei's adoptive son. I understand his volatility. It won't happen again. The cold way he spoke of it rose hairs on the back of Shota's neck. He remembered how hesitant the other children had been to confirm Hitoshi's report, how his son had to glare at them and demand they speak up, and how Shota himself had assured them that they all wouldn't get in trouble, and they had still looked uncomfortable. It's not me I worry about, Sensei. Ida Tenya, of all people, had so anxiously explained, refusing to testify unless Shota promised he'd defend Midoriya. Of course he will, Araka had chimed in. Deku-kun saved him at the USJ, and he saved Eri, and she wouldn't want Deku to be in trouble either. What the fuck kind of loyalty, Shota wondered, was Problem Child inspiring in his friends?
Good.
Was all Hisashi said about the matter.
So tell me, are they questioning you without a guardian present?
No, Inko is here, Midoriya clarified immediately. His mother flinched, eyes going wide as she'd been slapped by the use of her first name, when the boy had always called her Mom before. Was Midoriya speaking like that because he was begrudging to his mother's part in the events today, or was he catering to Problem Parent's resentment of that woman? The latter would explain the frost in Hisashi's words when he spoke again.
I see, Inko.
His voice hardened, sharpened, until it was several times as biting as Midoriya-san's had been before.
You let them question our son?
My son, Inko corrected uncharacteristically. Shota was not going to touch that divorce with a 10-foot pole, or a 20-foot, or a 20-meter.
Is he really yours?
The man asked, and holy shit, he could not sound more like a villain if he had tried. Who was this guy?
When the one he comes to for help in his darkest hours, his safe haven against all manner of harm and heartbreak, the only one to unconditionally support his dream has always been me.
Faintly, Shota decided that this absolutely explained why Midoriya Inko was so uncomfortable being reminded of her ex-husband. Are you always like this? All Might interrupted suddenly. Do you care about Inko at all, or is it just in her capacity as the mother of your son? What are you, Endeavor? The line went very quiet. A sense of foreboding settled over Shota like a shroud. Everyone in the room realized that Yagi had gone too far. When Hisashi spoke again, his tone had become ice-cold and menacing.
All Might,
He hissed.
how dare you speak to me as if you have the right?
Shota glanced at Problem Child, deeply concerned. He found his student watching the exchange with a bored expression, elbow on the desk to prop his chin on his hand. Midoriya caught his eye, sent him an apologetic grimace, and loudly interrupted the brewing argument with, "Dad's right." Over Yagi's shocked spluttering, he continued, "Can we go back to the actual topic of this call?" Hisashi's tone shifted completely back to his earlier friendliness, which creeped Shota the hell out.
You're right, Izu.
He smiled.
I got distracted for a moment. I suppose it's my fault that you've been held up over all this, isn't it? Well, here, let me get a couple of things to come over properly. I've never liked conference calls.
Aren't you in America? Yagi wondered aloud. This time, Midoriya's father ignored him.
I'll be at UA in 10 minutes.
In the tense silence that followed, Shota saw Midoriya relax into his chair and eat a cookie. The so-declared 10 minutes proved a nerve-wracking interval for everyone. Namasa personally likened it to a municipal task force waiting for detectives from higher up the food chain to take over a case. The sullen silence, the tense atmosphere, the weight of anticipation, the cooling cups of concentrated coffee. That some had tea did not have much bearing on the comparison. Or should he say, nerve-wracking for almost everyone. Midoriya Izuku had settled back into his chair with a certain quiet relief the moment his father announced he would be coming to the school. Still, the room had relaxed just enough that they all jumped when Nezu's dark console buzzed for an alert for someone on the campus secondary gate. The one for important visitors, like law enforcement and pro-heroes, which students and parents generally were not. But if the gate activated at all, then the correct code must have been entered into the system, which meant Midoriya's father was on the VIP list. "Good afternoon, Principal Nezu," smiled the voice of Midoriya Hisashi through the intercom. "I have a new block of Peru for you." Nezu stiffened, fluffing up with surprise in a way that could be bribery, but felt to Namasa's instincts like something else. He hit the button to open the gates within seconds of the word reaching his ears. "Welcome," he chirped. Or was that more of a squeak? Chapter 7. Shota's mental image of Midoriya Hisashi as a mob boss turned out to be fairly in line with reality. He was tall, taller than even All Might in his prime, and broad-shouldered, and had a trained combatant's steady bearing. He also looked a lot like his son, which Shota somehow hadn't expected. His luminous white hair was undeniably as fluffy as Midoriya's verdant green, and he had the same diamond arrangements of freckles on his cheeks, below glinting red eyes, which was about where the superficial similarities ended. "Good afternoon, everyone." The man offered a polite smile to the room, only the barest facade of friendliness in it, one notch above a tiger baring its teeth. It was an expression unlike Midoriya, as Shota could have conceived of, sending a shiver of apprehension down his spine. Someone who didn't know UA's principal very well would have not noticed, but Shota had been both Nezu's student and his employee. He'd caught Nezu's flinch when Hisashi spoke through the gate intercom, minutes before, and he caught it again now, the faintest tell of his boss's apprehension, as Hisashi laid a red-ribbon box down before the hem of the desk and opened it with a flourish to reveal the so-called tea. "This is lovely tea, Akatani-san. Thank you." Midoriya Akatani? Hisashi smiled with his eyes now satisfied. "I had it in marked for the next society meeting, but this is just an opportune time and much sooner." He took a seat in the armchair that had been sat out for him, beside Izuku, after moving it so he could face everyone in the room. Unprompted, Problem Child moved his seat too, so that they were in a wide circle, and he was next to his father. "Society?" was Takashi, asking the question that was on Shota's, everyone's mind, really. "As it happens," the principal said cheerfully, having recovered from whatever momentary startle he'd been just experienced. "Akatani-san is my senior in an international group of legal experts concerning the rights of quirked people. I've a disarray. I hadn't expected to encounter you in your exclusive civilian identity," he added. "But the world is smaller than we think, isn't it?" "Allow me to introduce myself." Hisashi offered another foreboding smile. "Akatani Hisashi, of the United Nations Commission for Metahuman Rights. Midoriya is my family name." Ah, that made a terrible amount of sense. Shota resisted the urge to facepalm. Problem Child would have a UN diplomat for a secret father, and the notoriously powerful Metahumans' Right Commission, also known as the group responsible for making Japan's government recognize Nezu as a legal person. "I take it Midoriya is about to receive permission for his weapons cache," Shota observed. "He is," Nezu nodded. "Thank you for your time, Detective, but a record of this incident will no longer be necessary." "Now wait just a minute," Yagi spoke up, holding a hand to keep Tatashi from leaving, though the record device had already been deactivated and its contents erased. "Yagi, you idiot," groaned Shota despairingly in the confines of his own head. "Can you please get with the program?" "Oh, don't worry, I won't be leaving," Hisashi said.
This is the first opportunity I've had in a long while to advocate directly on Izuku's behalf.
He crossed one leg over the other and interlaced his fingers on his lap.
Let us discuss my son's education.
Izuku was torn between relief at getting out of trouble with his dad's connections, a classic solution he hadn't even considered, and an unfathomable embarrassment as Hisashi proceeded to tear into Yue's grossly insignificant training methods, wherein he referred to the current state of hands as blatant medical malpractice resulting from borderline educational neglect. He didn't raise his voice or make threats against the school, no. Izuku's father led by example, and his example was to give clear criticism and then describe the ways they could fix what was wrong.
I will be pulling Izuku from classes this week to undergo the necessary reconstructive surgery for his hands, hitherto painfully overdue.
Izuku gasped. Really? I thought you said the specialist wasn't going to be available until winter break. He'd heard about the team of highly sought-after professionals from Hisashi ages ago, right after the sports festival. Their publications of the tissue regeneration had been fascinating to read, and his dad had promised him a tour of the facilities before the procedure to get some of the current experiments. A heavy hand ruffled his hair, stopping him before he vibrated out of his seat.
I did, Hisashi said dryly. And then you went after overhaul. I deemed it necessary to have you moved up the list.
At the same time, from across the room, You can't do that! I have sole custody, Hisashi! Oh dear. She'd really stepped into that argument, Izuku thought, glancing at Aizawa-sensei. Do I need to be here for this? He interrupted, because he didn't want to be if he didn't. You can go, Midoriya-kun. Nezu smiled at him. Izuku hefted up his bag and made to leave. See you tomorrow, senseis, he said at the door. Bye, Takashi-san. He wasn't ashamed to call this fleeing the scene. He was just being a dutiful son. If he left now, his father wouldn't have to apologize for losing his temper in front of him. The temperature of the room dropped 10 degrees the minute the door closed. Midoriya Hisashi frowned for the first time in the entire conversation, and for once, Shota could vividly imagine the snarling dragging in the background of the men's darkening glare.
It would be much wiser of you, Inko, to stop keeping me from Izuku.
Midoriya's mother bit back a reply, evidently sensing the danger in his argument, and squeezing Yagi's hand in hers, hard enough to make him wince. Shota saw Hisashi's eyes follow the motion and settle, heavier on the former number one hero.
And you,
he growled, standing from the chair.
It's about time we have a talk, All Might, about exactly what kind of help you decided to give my sweet...
A step forward, a crackle of red lightning from gleaming red eyes.
Brilliant!
Looming over Yagi, who had gone pale with some kind of realization.
Quirkless son.
Hi guys, thank you so much for the support. I'm not outright ending it, it's just I'm running out of storage, but I will be posting the last chapter, chapter 8, soon. I want to thank you all for so much support. I know this took a long time to make, and I know you guys been patiently waiting for this. It's just a lot of things came up, and I wanted to make this the best for you guys. I just hope you guys can at least wait a little while longer. I don't know, probably like a couple days until I get chapter 8 out, and then it'll be final. But I hope you guys know I got you guys a surprise. Anyway, thank you all for watching. Stay tuned until, like, I don't know, a couple days later. And have a good night.